That was amazing, actually. Yeah, you sit where you want. Sit where you want. And do we have Asta? Hi. Asta, where are you? Aha, cool. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves really quickly. Just name your organization, affiliation, how you want to do that. And then just so you can start mentally preparing, I'm going to ask each of you to share what gave you some optimism the last 2 days. And then once we're done with that, you're going to each share what has triggered your cynicism over the last 2 days, and then we're going to take the conversation from there. So Abeba, you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll hear from each of you. Yeah.
Thank you. Abeba Brahani, she, hers. I have founded a new lab, the AI Accountability Lab, and I am a PI there, which is located in Trinity College, Dublin, in Ireland.
Hello. Is this on?
I think so.
Or I'm just loud. Hi, everybody. I'm Nabiha Sayed. I'm the executive director of the Mozilla Foundation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amba Kak. I co-lead the AI Now Institute with Sarah West.
Hi, everyone. I'm Asta Kapoor. I'm the co-founder of Apti Institute.
So I think you already can tell that these are some amazing women to hear thoughts about the last few days. I feel like maybe we'll start with you, Asta. On the last 2 days, I feel like I've seen you several times. There's been some eye rolling, but there have been other times.
I'm not supposed to talk about that.
But what have you, I mean, in the last 2 days, I'm sure there were some bright spots in terms of how the discourse has changed in terms of what you're seeing. Do you want to share a little bit about maybe what made you feel a little positive?
Yeah, I think that the agenda, as it stood from the beginning, was about the here and now, which was very different from Bletchley, and I think that that was quite optimistic. I think that the focus on public interest AI, thanks to some people in the room, was also very, very important. And so I got in yesterday very optimistic. So we'll take stock there.
I mean, that was, okay. Amba, any deeper optimistic reflections to share?
The bar has been set so high. I don't know that I can compete. I think for me, maybe similarly, it was the sort of mission-oriented public interest AI framing that felt strangely radical in this crazy race we're at. So the idea that you start from the problem you're trying to solve and then figure out if and whether and how AI has a role to play, rather than the, we're trying to create AI-shaped holes to fill dynamic that is ever present. It felt like the right antidote to some of the drill, baby drill, we're yet to see returns from scaling kind of energy that was in many of the other rooms.
Yeah. Drill, baby, drill. Okay, Nabiha, what do you think?
I, too, was happy that we remembered to talk about humans. That was great. And it was interesting and I think heartening to see that there were tools being launched like Roost, like Global Dialogues from CIP, things that were like, can we take our values and actually put it into something? That was nice. It's like a little bit of action, a little bit of movement. Repeated discussion about jobs, sustainability, that kind of thing. Good. Like, again, remembering to talk about humans is a low bar, and we barely hit it.
Trip over it constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. I was actually on the panel discussing AI in public interest, and it was a panel with amazing people, super insightful, very nuanced, grounded discussions. I was so privileged to be there. And I guess I'm so happy that we were talking about this. However, my cynicism comes that a lot of that super nuanced discussion around how we need to center, fundamental rights, equity, and so on, as we think about technology, as we build technology. A lot of that discussion during the panel, I feel cynical that it's not going to necessarily translate into action. It's not necessarily translate into actually supporting ecosystems and infrastructures that enable not just building technology, but also equipping the public with actual realistic understanding of current AI systems and tools for people, tools of resistance, tools of accountability, but also some of the entire summit felt a little performative. For example, I would have loved to, a much in-depth discussion of what's public AI and what's not, because there seems to be a lot of assumption that, we just need more data, massive compute clusters and more resources, and we just need to, if we have all that, and by magic, AI that is actually good for the public will just magically happen. So this assumption that all AI is good, rather than the fact that no AI is inherently good. So yeah, maybe I've said too much. So that's my take.
That's why I had you go last, because I knew you weren't going to be able to resist segueing into what triggered you. But it was a really good kickoff. So Nabiha, do you want to share maybe some of the things that you were either disappointed by, or kind of you had that internal voice being like, what is this? What is happening?
That's my forever internal voice. No, I mean, look, globally, it does feel like we're in that moment in cartoons where like the coyote runs off the cliff and he's in the air, but he doesn't fall to the ground yet, and we're just pretending that everything is fine and we're in the air. We are in not an easy time geopolitically, she says as an American. And we're just kind of not talking about that, right? We're not talking about financial interests aligning with political interests, using AI as a remarkable tool for consolidating power. We're just like, oh, that's a thing over there. That's the thing, right? It's the thing. And it just was like a background character in some of the conversations. I'd get a little hat tip once in a while. And so that was a bit of a disappointment to not like actually face the monster in the room of what are we gonna do. So there was that. The other thing is I generally like people to debate and get spicy. And there was not as much pulling out of friction that obviously exists, right? Going back to that first point, there are serious disagreements. And they'd come out once in a while lightly, but a structure that could maybe tease out frictions, both productive and sometimes not productive, but at least illustrative of where we need to go, would be helpful. And so that's both a format critique and also just thinking about, are we being real about the moment that we're in and the choices that need to be made? And are we treating it with the seriousness that we need to? And my answer is, in the past few days, not exactly.
I can't remember who said this, but someone said like the road to hell is paved with there are benefits and there are risks metaphors. And honestly, like I feel like there has been so much mixed messaging in the last 2 days. And like one way to look at it is like, on the one hand, we have this excellent communique that like, names all of the values, public interest, sustainability, all of the good things. And on the other hand, we have President Macron, announcing a $100 billion fund with MGX and sort of with very little, if any, commitment to a broader vision that goes along with it. And I think the sort of charitable version is these two can sort of proceed alongside, but I think my cynical take is that the agenda that wins or the agenda that eclipses the other is going to be the one that's backed by industry interests until we name the problem. But Nabiha.
Yeah, very similar to Nabiha and Amba and Abebe, exactly that. Like, I think it seemed like the summit was happening at a different time. And it just didn't talk about the time that we lived in. So I started my day yesterday at a workshop on global governance. And then, there were people from the UN and they were talking about consultations, and 190 countries have been consulted. And here's a document, and here's another report we're going to do. And then somebody was like, but this is not a great time for multilateralism. We're like, yes. And then the whole room sort of chuckled, because exactly, like there are monsters, elephants, and things in the room that we just skirted around. And we just, we all were very well behaved. There were no disagreements. And I think that's just, I think somebody called it anticipatory obedience. And I think that's where the whole summit was.
Can I add a cynicism?
Definitely.
No, because on the well-behaved, I was, by my own standards, also well-behaved. And I reflected on that afterwards of it's not like I got on a stage and said, listen, guys, it's real bad. I didn't either, right? And so there is something in these conversations that makes it hard to name the problems, to do so with the force required, and that's not only pointing fingers at other people, like I did that too. And if this is not the fora, right, we should ask ourselves, what is the fora for that? Where is that? It needs to happen somewhere. And again, speaking as American, there are no other grown-ups but us. So like, we have to figure out what those honest, difficult conversations of real trade-offs, like naming all the monsters in the room, has to happen. Maybe it'll be your podcast.
Maybe so, definitely.
But it was like, that was a real point of reflection, right? Like, we're all not having those conversations.
I felt the same. I feel very polite in those spaces. And then you just
So
go
not
to the
like
side
you.
and you're just like, fuck that, you know.
Also, there was no food. That was
And
the
there was
other-
no food. No, I feel like there was no hangry strategy.
Sugar cubes.
Yeah, like tiny, tasty food.
There were cute, yummy foods. They were cute. What we needed was like
Sandwiches? Yeah. Amba, you want to jump in?
My other additional cynicism thing or this moment of despair, I think today, was realizing that I don't know how it happened so quickly, or I do know, several global elections. Regulation has become a dirty word in a way that I could not have predicted even a year ago. I think the headwinds are really immense, and I think there's a way in which it feels, the caricature of regulation, which is this sort of burdensome, bureaucratic, architecture, has really succeeded. And I think like the work that we've all been part of for so many years is to say regulation is really like in its ideal form, it's a proxy for protecting people from harm. This is about people, and I feel like we've sort of lost that narrative fight in a way that will be hard but not impossible to claw back.
Go.
I was on a panel with Mariana Mazzucato, the economist, and she, I think it was in the green room, made a really great point about like, we could also conceive of regulation as constraints that drive you towards something good. But instead, it's only being conceived of as just hurdle, right? There's no idea of what it drives. And that sort of nuance of like what regulation is, right? Both protective and directive towards. That's not really how we're thinking about regulation at all. And I think
Investment versus regulation is like the meme.
And like just like in creativity, like constraints can be good and productive. And so then what's our responsibility for surfacing that narrative again? Yeah. Because it has been gobbled up by money.
When you said investments versus regulation, Amba?
Yeah, it feels a little bit like, and this is a current we've been seeing in industrial policy over the last year, right? Like governments being like, Europe is done regulating and now we're going to innovate, which sort of like really pins that argument down in a very unhelpful way.
And we've been hearing this like even before the summit, right? Like the whole India third way is that, the Chinese are the surveillance state, the Europeans are over-regulating. US has like too much free market, and so the fourth way, I think there's a book like that. but yeah, so we're just going to balance all of this. But like you can scale or you can regulate, you can innovate or you can regulate. So it's always like the regulation bucket is the bad guy, and then here we are, many years later, just saying like no regulation at all. So.
Can I just quickly, it's funny when you think about any other industry, literally any other industry, even think of like a simple tool like a toaster. They have to go through so much, regulatory processes before they put their products in the market. Whereas AI systems that are doing so much destruction, so much harm, when you bring about regulation, you are immediately put as killing innovation, as the Luddite, as the negative person that is not contributing positively to the debate. And it's just like, sometimes I really wonder why is the AI industry so different from the pharmaceuticals, from any other, from traditional media.
Yeah, I think one article I love is Sean McDonald talking about product warranties, and he talks about toasters, and he says that the reason that you have a product warranty, you have to enumerate all of the possible risks of the thing and say we will warranty against those risks happening, and we can guarantee that because we know how the product works. AI, they're just throwing shit out there and saying like maybe it will do something helpful, so they can't enumerate the risks with enough specificity to actually warranty their products, which means you end up in this situation where like it's just kind of a wild west. But Nabiha, you are a lawyer. I feel like you probably have thoughts about warranty.
And product liability? How many hours do you guys have? No, I mean, looking at the history of product liability is fascinating, right? Because for so many things, and so many signs, and so many tags on hair dryers, why are they there? Not because someone necessarily thought about all the harm up front. For a lot of them, because that thing happened to somebody, right? And so for toasters, toasters literally blew up in people's faces. Toasters were blowing up in pretty housewives' faces, and there was gory and visual, and people saw the harm. I forget what privacy law scholar said that privacy's problem is that there's not enough dead bodies, meaning that it's not visceral and doesn't move people. And the difficulty with AI is that the harms are not yet visible and tangible in such a direct way to be like, that thing did this. It's attenuated, it's invisible, it's difficult to see. And that is the work, right? For us to elevate, surface, make it direct and say, that's why, and that's why you need that rule, so let's go. But it's hard, because it's a little bit more complex than a toaster.
You're probably right, Nabiha, but I had a sort of visceral reaction to you saying that we don't have evidence.
We do, but it's not like...
I agree. I almost feel like the real moral crisis is that, I think the political and industry establishment has told us many times that they maybe don't care about the people that are the victims of the systems
not
that
the
are
right
failing,
victims.
or not the right victims, because there are military tools, AI tools being used in Gaza and elsewhere. Like we've seen the writing is definitely on the wall.
We in India, and I have to say this, is like we have a concept of Aadhaar debts, like only Indians have it, which is that exclusion that leads to lack of entitlements, that leads to death. And we're a country that actually can trace it back to like biometrics just not working. So even before AI, there's like actual dead bodies courtesy large technological systems, but we just don't, it's the teething troubles.
It's like how to draw that line, to draw the connective tissue, to capture imagination, to say, we want the good parts. We don't want the bad parts. The bad parts look like that. Do something, right? How do we create that urgency, those stories, and capture imagination to harness it in that way?
Yeah, I feel like the diffusion of harm feels like a corollary to the concentration of power. And I feel like the summit felt like this manifestation of concentration of power is like a way you might organize around change. So like, let's just get all the most important people in a room and then just kind of see what happens, which I think kind of connects to the feeling that it felt disjointed and not particularly capable of the kind of debate that you were describing. But Amba, I feel like AI now, I feel like I can name check you thinking about concentration of power. Like, how did you feel in terms of like theory of change, getting everybody that was like powerful in a room and then being like, what happens? Do you think it has an effect?
I'm still thinking through your metaphor of concentration of power in the summit microcosm, but I mean, I guess in general, at AI Now, I feel like our work has, especially in the last few years, been about socializing and leading with an analysis that centers concentration of power in a very narrow section of the tech industry as the challenge of our time, and not just as a kind of lens or like, narrative device, but really as a check to our strategies, as a muscle memory, so that we are always questioning ourselves, is this thing that we're putting all of this resource and attention to, is it going to eventually concentrate power in the very same hands? Is it going to structurally move us away from status quo? Or is it really going to be more of the same? And I think that energy has often, and my co-director Sarah will attest to this, like we often inhabit the feeling of a killjoy for that reason. It's like, oh, we have to say the awkward thing, which is like eventually maybe sometimes, nothing is better than something, which like for anyone who's been trained in policy is a crazy idea. Like the bias to action is so strong. So I think for me, just like coming to the summit, it's like we are, on the one hand, as I said, like it makes me optimistic that we're revving up all of this political capital towards a public interest AI frame. I think that is really important. But I think the reason that all of us were like, it feels kind of awkward and at odds with the actual real world is because it wasn't moving that political energy towards naming the problem that I think we need to name. So I think if we had had a very different summit with like very few signatories, but a conclusion that named the problem of concentration of power, I think that we would be longer term in a better place.
But also, I think that, I mean, the question I was asking myself all day yesterday is like, why are there no protests outside? Like, that was a question I think I asked you as well. Is that, because I think it's that concentration of power and how esoteric the whole AI question has been made. And then the fact that civil society, it was like very gated, obviously. Very few of us were inside. And then there was almost no one outside because that was also not permitted. And I think it's because we've not been able to build collective power around this. And that's been a big failure of the movement, I guess, that we all have been at least a part of or overseeing or whatever the version of engagement is. But we've just not been able to build the collective power of the powerful people with the money who are obviously coalescing around this versus all of us who seem very, very fragmented. And I think that if you look at, say, the COP thing, even from the beginning, like there were protests around COP, this was serious business. And this is what the fourth one is going to be in India. We've not mobilized people on the street just now. And I think that that's where we're failing in some ways.
Can I quickly add? I think unlike other industries like, big tobacco or big oil, even though big tech is very similar, they are deploying the exact same tactics to kind of, capture the industry and concentrate power. I have a feeling for most of the public, technology is still seen in a very positive light because you have big tech corporations pushing this narrative that AI equals innovation, AI equals, societal advancement, AI equals, excellent science. So the public has been lied to because none of this is true. And this false narrative is almost steeped in the public. We will get there eventually because you can't sustain these false narratives forever. But I think we are still at a stage where still the dominant narrative tends to portray AI in much positive light. I think
it's also free.
Yep.
I just wanted to say that the French left did organize a day of protest on the 9th. I don't know what happened to that, but it was
They were
centered
kettled
around
by cops and taken off the street.
Right. Yeah.
So there was a very small protest. It didn't last very long, but yeah.
This is so encouraging. I didn't know about that. This is good. Maybe it's all gonna happen, sooner than I anticipated. So this is good.
Maybe, but I think we come back to this problem of abstraction because I feel like the sort of structural nature of it and the abstraction of it, like I think the reason we're not seeing mass mobilization in the US right now is because the scale of change in 3 weeks is so seismic that it's kind of stunning. And I feel like there's something also about big tech industry's ability to kind of feel so, they're making these huge plays that we can't possibly understand. And I think there's this shock value that kind of people freeze. And then also the abstraction of it. Like, what would you protest? Like, if you were a person that didn't quite engage on our issues, you knew there was, these assholes with lots of money convening at a thing. What would you do? Yeah.
Jobs. Jobs. It's probably the most tangible of them, right? And then to me, sort of, I as a person who cares about education and education around AI, I do think one of the benefits of getting people to learn more about the technology is all to pave the way for really specific resistance beyond jobs, right? It's because education came up a lot in different panels or in different conversations, and is often cast as just education as reskilling, education as training, but actually education as pathway also to knowledgeable resistance, right? Sometimes you can know everything about something and say, actually, I opt out. That's not the right tool, that's not the right thing. And so I am really bullish on what education can provide. I am optimistic that technology can be good, maybe not tomorrow or next week, but it can get there. I really do believe that it can get there. But I think education is now a really useful thing for us to engage in because it might also give us the proximity to the problem to defeat some of the abstraction that might be inhibiting people to act.
I just want to share my optimism with Nabiha. I also deeply believe that, AI technologies can actually be good. They can actually benefit and they can be used in ways any other, scientific progresses or any other tools can't provide the benefit for. But we have to, in order to get there, and I do hope we will eventually get there, but in order to get there, we really have to decouple AI from capitalist systems. And maybe that's just wishful dreaming, but yeah.
Before we go to you, I feel like Abeba always brings an academic paper to a knife fight, and I just want to ask you, like, in terms of empirical research in the space the last few days, how have you felt about evidence being brought to bear when we talk about AI's capabilities and that kind of thing? Like, where do you feel like the state of discourse is in that arena?
Unfortunately, I have also attended some side events before the summit, and I have attended various panels during the summit. In terms of, whether it's academics or, folks from the industry grounding their claims on empirical evidence, I haven't really seen anything spectacular. It's basically, the norm. They follow the status quo. A lot of claims. I mean, one of the biggest problems currently we have is so much hype around AI. Even for those of us who are inside the field, it becomes so difficult kind of, to dissect what's actually the actual capability and what state-of-the-art systems can do and what's exaggerated or what's outright just incorrect. And I haven't really seen conversations that ground AI capabilities or other systems in a way that is grounded in actual empirical evidence. And I was actually talking to someone earlier about protein folding and AlphaFold and a lot of the work that has come out of DeepMind. And when you talk to actual scientists, for example, we all, maybe not all, but most of us probably have come to the conclusion that protein folding is a solved problem. But if you talk to people that work in this space, they will tell you it's far from being solved. And I think in 2023, for example, DeepMind released a paper that really went viral, that changed the entire scientific landscape, where they claimed that using their AI technologies, they have discovered, this is in organic chemistry, they have discovered millions of novel structures and what is the technical term? I can't remember. And then a year later, actual domain experts from UCL kind of painstakingly went line by line analyzing their claims, and their conclusion was that none of it is actually true, none of it can be supported by empirical evidence. So even the claims that seem most grounded, when actual domain experts look at it, we find that most of it is just filled with hype. And this is one of the problems we are facing in whether it's in the public understandings of knowledge or even within the scientific community itself. And bringing the conversation back to empirical evidence and bringing the conversation back to the reality would be one of the struggles or part of the struggle that will remove a lot of the problems that we are currently experiencing.
It's science-y, not scientific. Like it's a science vibe, but it's not actually science.
Science washing.
Yeah, science washing.
Can I just say, to riff on what you're saying, it feels like, in the bias to action, like what can we actually do in this really constrained political environment? I do think that for policy, it still feels like empiricism is our best shot at poking a hole and demanding accountability, because I think there's a level at which the lack of if the foundation doesn't hold, then that's going to be pretty bad for business. It's going to be pretty bad for the military that's using these systems. It's going to be bad for national security. So I'm just grateful that we still have technologists that are fighting that fight, and we're also through the public interest fund or current or whatever, where sorry, Vidushi, that we are trying to resource those efforts, because I think that in this environment we're going to need a lot more of that.
Just quickly before we proceed, because Vidushi will murder me if I don't do this. The institute is called Current AI, and it's a new public interest partnership that was launched yesterday that hopefully is a lot of resources that will be going to this room, maybe, to do more and more work in this area. So just I'm sorry, Vidushi. Asta, you jump
No,
in.
just on empiricism, I think that, so on the 9th, there was a wonderful symposium organized by Connected by Data, Data in Society, and some of us on participatory AI. And one of the tracks was resistance as participation. And I think that in that, what we were seeing is papers and things that were presented on empirical data on how communities and people and ideas and methods are actually coming together to create evidence on the other side that this is possible, to stay on the margins, to engage as you want to not engage if you didn't desire. So I think that also just broadening where we need the empirical evidence and who creates that evidence, whether it's communities or academics, and how they work together. I think that's really important, because we do, including myself, have a certain idea of the peer-reviewed journal as evidence. And I think that there's a lot that is happening that we're just not even able to track. So how do we broaden the sort of version of empiricism is also important.
I just wanted to add to my optimism list from earlier. Current AI was on my optimism list.
Hey, look at that. Okay, I feel like I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about tech sovereignty and like digital sovereignty stuff. So we got like a lot of like, you know, dick swinging from the US and the UK this week on like, I mean, facts. These are facts.
I know.
Yes, we can say whatever we want.
Children
Yeah.
are listening to
Differently, if I knew the rules allowed this.
Yeah, I know. What is the honesty quotient of this podcast?
We talked about being polite.
I said I was polite there. Yeah, we have arrived at a new location with new people around us and newfound freedom, and I'm going to say whatever I want. So this idea that you're supposed to align this like deep sense of national interest, deep sense of sovereignty in tech development, also the European values vibes from the French government on like tech stack kind of stuff. Yeah. I feel like India has been here for quite some time in terms of framing things in that way, the India tech stack, et cetera. Do you want to talk a little bit about any analysis on that in terms of where that leads, or kind of your reflections on it?
Yeah, every time I hear the word stack, I cringe a little bit. It's been 12 years and we never get over it. But no, I think so. We've been as Indians, we've been very good at like tying the building of technology to the idea of India, and that's why India Stack, and I think that Eurostack has very nicely borrowed that from us. The question on sovereignty is an interesting one. So if I just give you an example, again, on payments, we built a payments protocol. It was digital public infrastructure. It's called Unified Payments Interface, UPI. We have many, many acronyms, so keep up. But the two players who are on the protocol are, and so this was supposed to be to democratize payments in India. Payments was an issue. We needed to make sure that everybody is able to transact meaningfully. So you make a public protocol, excellent, and then you sort of make it open. There was supposed to be a public option that didn't survive. It was very poorly made. So now we only have two big players, one owned by Walmart and the other one owned by Google. And they own about 85% of the quick payments on UPI. So the idea of sovereignty was only confined to the building of the protocol, which was built by volunteers, and now the people who are playing are the two big giants who are not Indian. Some people say, like, if it was Ambani or Adani who are our own oligarchs, it would have been better. But it's not ours. They're not Indian. But also, fun fact, which is that Google actually didn't have a payments play before UPI. Google Pay was the only product that was made outside the borders of the United States in India because of the protocol. It enabled Google to be a player in the payments ecosystem. And now Google Pay is a thing that all of us know from other parts of the world. Similarly, in Africa, right after the DPI summit was organized in Egypt. Some of us were there.
Sounds plausible.
So, and then right after that, there was a discussion on DPI in a box. And where does the DPI in a box reside? On the Google Cloud. So are we just, through the idea of sovereignty and building these protocols that allow for us to be safe, to be independent, to have a sense of, an identity around technology, are we just market making for people? Because how do you govern open protocols is an open question for me. I have no idea. We have a regulator in India for the payments protocol. It was supposed to cap at 30%. It's been 5 years, and that that regulation has not been enacted, because if you start to cap then market power after it's been built, then it's very hard to roll it back, to the point that even like Meta's payment platform has not been able to permeate because Google and Walmart's I guess applications are so big and so entrenched. So I'm a bit iffy on the tech sovereignty DPI question. Yeah, and Prime Minister Modi talked about it today. He talked about it in his speech. He said the way to build, independent, sovereign architectures is through DPI. But I mean,
no, I have a question for you, actually. I was going to ask Alex if I can. Yeah. No, I'm just curious because today Prime Minister Modi obviously, said a few words about hosting the next summit, and he sort of centered his remarks around DPI. And apart from the fact that both AI and DPI are like woefully underdefined terms, I was like, what do these have in common? Like, how do they relate, or how do you predict they will relate?
Well, DPI will soon become digital public intelligence, so then they'll just relate seamlessly.
Oh my God!
But yeah, I mean, it's been suggested, and then also, there's the. So I think that they're doing like, protocols for compute and how do you do that. So there's a lot of good language around this. But then if you start poking around a little bit, I think it becomes iffy. And I mean, India's G20 presidency was a start of this like DPI juggernaut that we're now seeing in different parts of the world. I think that, again, we need to define these things. We need to make sure that how we think about payments and ID and data exchanges in the context of DPI. He talked about that as well, the data empowerment and protection architecture today in his speech. We need to question this stuff, and that's where also the evidence needs to be created. I think that a lot of the evidence that's existed in the India context on DPI has not been taken seriously. People, like I said, like there's actual bodies around this, but and now it's getting refurbished, and the narrative washing is very competent. And I'll get into trouble for saying this, but I think that that's what's also happening, and we need to be forewarned where we deploy big concepts like publicness, like openness, like infrastructure, all of it in one breath, and then we don't do anything beyond that.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes. You mentioned the next summit being in India. Thinking about these summits, which I feel like maybe it was Politico that was like, why do we still do these? Do you guys have reflections, just as kind of closing reflections on what you might want to see at the next summit, or sort of thinking about this one? What do you want? Do you want more summits? Do you think this is a waste of time? What do you want to see? How could they be different? Not all at once.
But the thought I have is kind of a downer. I think like I don't want to think about summits for a while. I just feel like I'm reminded again that if we all collectively spend our energies doing some of what we've talked about, which is what does it mean for our strategies, our work as a think tank, how can we be in service of like building power that is able to disrupt not just rooms like the summit, but more generally like make a dent in this crazy timeline we're in. I feel like that just personally, I'm feeling like less like looking at the next summit and instead looking elsewhere.
Others have thoughts?
I will, this is very unlike me, because usually when people ask me like my optimism, I just phrase, but I want my final words to be around my hope and my aspiration and my optimism. So earlier I said there is, one of the issues is lack of empirical evidence or lack of grounding your claims around something that can be verified, something that can be replicated, and so on. Something that follows actual, very basic scientific principles. And most AI products, or even AI research itself, tends not to do that. So my optimism comes from me seeing over the last year a thriving community of academic auditors, journalistic investigators, organizing, coming together, and doing amazing work. If you actually look at some of the actual incidents that have brought about some concrete change, whether it's retracting some technology or whether it's forcing tech companies to change something, comes from investigative journalism. 404 Media has been really at the forefront, and you have the Markup and ProPublica. And again, in the audit space, people really are organizing. People are coming together. I'm also grateful for my lab. That gives me a lot of optimism. We are focusing on audits and generally accountability research. Also outside that, you see a lot of movements and organizing within civil society. You also see thriving communities of builders that are actually building, some of the amazing examples of technology that are within the public interest, that are within social good. I just want to drop name a couple of them. One of them is Kabako Academies. They are based in Bamako, in Mali. They are building, language technologies, voice translation, language translation, all using, their own data that they sourced, that they labeled, and the technologies that they built. The other one is the Maori community, again, working in language technologies. So seeing these movements increasing and people building alternative technologies, or Signal also, like Signal is like my all-time go-to example. Everybody should use Signal. So seeing this, kind of communities popping up and getting together, whether it's technology builders or civil society or the academic community or journalists, is something that really makes me happy and that keeps me hopeful.
That's lovely. Nabiha, you want to go?
I can. I mean, just on the, I'm a little bit with Amba also because the summit is in India. So the communities, the communities that we are building are likely not going to get a visa to be in India for the summit. So I think that where we have these things is also important because the openness of the environment to engage is as critical as, and so many of us were like, where's the civil society in Paris? You're going to have a very, very different summit in India from, if I'm right. And so I think we have to find other ways to coalesce, other spaces to coalesce. And I think that if this is what we're going to do over the next year is build power, like we need to find ways to do that.
I mean, as a person who is not likely to get a visa to India because of Pakistani parents, I feel that one. No, I mean, two wishes for a summit I will likely not be able to attend. Geopolitics. Wish number one, I was so heartened to hear us talk about the public interest more and more at this summit. Maybe at this summit we actually hear from the public, not just representatives of, but actual stories from directly would be a dream. That would be a hope. And the second is whether it is in our circles or with our camps and others to actually get into like the spicy discussions. Let us have a little friction. Let's debate and really get into it. I think that would be really fun for me to watch on YouTube at home and also productive to move it forward. Otherwise, I kind of agree with Politico. Why are we doing these?
What's it for? Okay,
Yeah.
that was great. Okay, I want to give people in the audience a chance to like ask a question or two. I feel like it's mean that I'm the one that gets asked all the questions. So does anybody have questions for anybody up here? Oh, we got a hand up. I think we have more mics coming at you, coming at you.
Hi there. I'm Greta Byram. I've been around in this space for a long time. Currently doing some work in the auditing field. I listened to the pre-podcast, which was great. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks, Abeba.
And I was really interested in the idea that Martin Tisney put out about clinicians. And I really would love to hear from these folks of, what do we mean by clinician? Who can be a clinician? What does it mean to be a practitioner, an implementer?
I feel like we could have Martin explain it since he's here, but I feel like just for context, he was actually quoting Meredith Whitaker on this difference between diagnosticians, so people that do the research to understand what the problem is, versus clinicians, so people that participate in the diagnostic process but also suggest how one might cure, I guess is the word. So thoughts on...
Can I just say
yeah,
one thing?
definitely.
Is it still on? Okay. I guess I'm interested in radical or, different thoughts meaning I don't necessarily want to hear consensus. I'm interested in like ways
As
that
in,
we could.
do we need clinicians? Is it okay to just
No,
be a
like-
diagnostician?
Can we imagine radically like what a clinician might be?
Okay, so what does a clinician look like in your world in terms of how one might be able to assert a possible solution to a problem? Abeba?
I'll
Yeah,
go,
go
I'll
for
go.
it.
So in the audit space, we often think of, what's the purpose of audits? Often it's, to diagnose, any issues that might be, that might exist, or to kind of to surface any problems. So because audits often are kind of categorized as, a diagnostics methods. But also, you can also build on that. You can point out, you can surface problems, and then you can, suggest alternative methods or alternative routes. So that tends to be the traditional understanding of, diagnostician in a clinician. I think it's very broad currently it's very broad. It can mean anything, but also you can think outside, the diagnostician in the clinician framework. But that's my understanding coming from the audit space.
Can I say maybe a slightly tangential thing? I think diagnostician is those who diagnose versus those that do something with that diagnosis. I feel like there's been a little bit of a sort of regulation versus innovation style binary between the two in our space in terms of, feeling immense pressure to not just be in the critics camp. And I think I've sort of now been able to own, again, speaking from AI now, own our space and saying, actually, we think it is only with repeated and relentless clear and honest diagnosis that we can sort of spur the right kind of action. So I guess I just want to make a pitch for, I think clinicians need to be and ideally come from a community of diagnosis.
Yes. Actually, just being a diagnostician, I don't know if that's a real word, but English is not my first language, so that's my excuse. It's good enough in and of itself. I strongly believe critic is service. The entire, scientific field is founded upon, peer review. The peer review process is core. When you put out your ideas, getting critics from various perspectives actually makes your work strong. So we don't need to be both, although we do need both clinicians and diagnosticians, but you don't necessarily need to be both, and you don't necessarily need to be only a clinician. Being a diagnostics is a really good and concrete service in and of itself, because without diagnosing a problem, you really can't treat it.
I have a weird clinician, if I've understood the distinction. It's there are the people who are cutting the power lines to the data centers. Those are a certain kind of clinician. So I think that we just, again, we live in a certain framework of what a diagnostician and a clinician
You guys are all doing great pronouncing. You don't have to seem so...
But I think, again, because I'm getting to the point which is this is urgent, guys. Let's get it together. And then if it means cutting the blowing up the pipeline or the cutting the wires, right? If that's a certain an action.
It cures something.
Yeah. Momentarily, but it will.
Okay, I think we can take one more. Does anybody have a question? Come on. Aha, I see Jim in the back.
Two hands, actually.
Oh, I can't see. Maybe it's just these.
Thanks. This might follow up from that comment. I'd love to get your take on sustainable AI. We heard the French government launching its coalition on sustainable AI, and lots of talk about something called sustainable AI. As far as I could see, it seemed to be an excuse to push the French nuclear industry. But I'm curious, what you make of this buzzword.
I will say, even with lights, I can see the facial expressions on several people in the first two rows. Some skepticism. Does anybody want to share thoughts on sustainable AI, what it is or what the discourse is for?
I'm excited to see it when it exists.
Just summit context is, I think that the overarching narrative was very much AI for sustainability. So the idea that AI can be repurposed in this sort of mission-oriented context towards solving for the climate crisis. And I think, civil society, many of whom are in this room right now, is really, really organized to disrupt that narrative and I think counter the premise and said, actually, the real crisis is that AI, as it currently exists and in its current trajectory, will never be within planetary limits. So let's deal with that problem first. I think more generally, there is definitely a fork in the road, as many of you know better than I do, around what our tactics need to be with sustainability, because I think there is an argument, and I would make it in favor of saying that we really tie the question of sustainability and how we're building this stuff to what are we building this stuff for. Maybe we don't build as much, maybe we build less, and I think that's where I think that would be a sort of healthy meeting of movements.
What did Macron say yesterday? Plug, baby, plug. Did he say that out loud?
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, he said it.
All right.
Was it plug?
missed that.
Does that sound better in French? I feel like it must.
He said it in English, which is why I understood it. I spent a lot of time remembering what verb he used, but it was, yeah.
It's plug.
I think so, yeah. It was, yeah.
On that note. Okay, so I want to thank these folks, and then I want to thank some other people. So can you say a little bit of warm applause for these folks for this amazing conversation? Okay, so other quick thanks. Thanks to AI Now for hosting and organizing this. So the alcohol you're about to consume was co-organized with AI Now and paid for by Mozilla partly. So thank you, Mozilla, for sponsoring that. I also want to thank the Morrison Group, who's an event planning organization that meant that for the last 2 days when I've been running around like a mad person, I literally didn't think about any of this until I arrived here, which I think is pretty impressive. So if anybody needs an event planned, the Morrison Group, fantastic. Also, the Computer Says Maybe team. Some of you know Jake Slater, and I'm literally going to name check him. He doesn't often get to go to these events, but many of you have had so much email correspondence with him. Now is your time to actually meet him in person. So go find him and say hi. He's wonderful. Also to colleague Zoe Trout, who did a lot of the organizing. I won't make you stand up, don't worry. And Georgia Yakovou and Sarah Miles, who turned this into something that will sound lovely when you're wearing your headphones. So with that, we'll end, and I think we're ending the live stream. Yeah? Great. Now you get to go hang out with people. So thank you for coming, and I'll talk to you all very soon.
Alix, you want to say where? You want to say where?
Oh, yeah. I should probably tell you where to go, but I actually don't know.